Roman numeral 3. Why spiritual worship is due to God. The third general is, why a spiritual worship is due to God and to be offered to Him. We must consider the object of worship and the subject of worship, the worshipper and the worshipped. God is a spiritual being. Man is a reasonable creature. The nature of God informs us what is fit to be presented to Him. Our own nature informs us what is fit to be presented by us. Reason number 1. The best we have is to be presented to God in worship, for in the first place, since God is the most excellent being, He is to be served by us with the most excellent thing we have, and with the choicest veneration. God is so incomprehensibly excellent that we cannot render Him what He deserves. We must render Him what we are able to offer, the best of our affections, the flower of our strength, the cream and top of our spirits. By the same reason that we are bound to give to God the best worship, we must offer it to Him in the best manner. We cannot give to God anything too good for so blessed a being. God being a great King, slight services become not His majesty. Malachi 1:13 and 14. It is unbecoming the majesty of God and the reason of a creature to give Him a trivial thing. It is unworthy to bestow the best of our strength on our lust and the worst and weakest in the service of God. An infinite spirit should have affections as near to infinite as we can. As He is a spirit without bounds, so He should have a service without limits. When we have given Him all, we cannot serve Him according to the excellency of His nature. Joshua 24, verse 19. Shall we give Him less than all? His infinite excellency and our dependence on Him as creatures demands the choicest adoration. Our spirits, being the noblest part of our nature, are as due to Him as the service of our bodies, which are the vilest. To serve Him with the worst only is to diminish His honor. Number 2, under the law, God commanded the best to be offered Him. He would have the males, the best of the kind, the fat, the best of the creature. Exodus 29, verse 13. The inward fat, not the offals. He commanded Him to offer Him the firstlings of the flock, not the firstlings of the womb, but the firstlings of the year. The Jewish cattle having 2 breeding times, in the beginning of the spring and the beginning of September. The latter breed was the weaker, which Jacob knew in Genesis 30 when he laid the rods before the cattle when they were strong in the spring, and withheld them when they were feeble in the autumn. One reason, as the Jews say, why God accepted not the offerings of Cain was because he brought the meanest, not the best of the fruit, and therefore it is said only that he brought of the fruit of the ground, Genesis 4, verse 3, not the first of the fruit, or the best of the fruit, as Abel, who brought the firstling of his flock and the fat thereof, verse 4. Number 3, and this the heathen practiced by the light of nature. They for the most part offered males as being more worthy, and burnt the male, not the female. Frankincense, as it is divided into those 2 kinds, they offered the best when they offered their children to Moloch. Nothing more excellent in man, and nothing dearer to parents and their children, which are parts of themselves. When the Israelites would have a golden calf or a representation of God, they would dedicate their jewels and strip their wives and children of their richest ornaments to show their devotion. Shall men serve their dumb idols with the best of their substance and the strength of their souls, and shall the living God have a duller service from us than idols had from them? God requires no such hard but delightful worship from us, our spirits. Number 4, all creatures serve man by the providential order of God with the best they have, as we by God's appointment receive from creatures the best they can give. Ought we not with a free will render to God the best we can offer? The beasts give us their best fat, the trees their best fruit, the sun its best light, the fountains their best streams. Shall God order us the best from creatures, and we put Him off with the worst from ourselves? Number 5. God has given us the choicest thing He had, a Redeemer that was the power of God and the wisdom of God, and the best He had in heaven, His own Son, and in Himself a sacrifice for us, that we might be enabled to present ourselves a sacrifice to Him. And Christ offered Himself for us, the best He had, and that with the strength of the deity through the eternal Spirit. And shall we grudge God the best of ourselves? As God would have a worship from His creature, so it must be with the best of His creature. If we have given ourselves to the Lord, 2 Corinthians 8, verse 5, we can worship with no less than ourselves. What is a man without his spirit? If we are to worship God with all that we have received from him, we must worship him with the best part we have received from him. It is but a small glory we can give him with the best, and shall we deprive him of his right by giving him the worst? As what we are is from God, so what we are ought to be for God. Creation is the foundation of worship, Psalm 100, verses 2 and 3. Serve the Lord with gladness. Know ye that the Lord he is God. It is he that made us. He hath ennobled us with spiritual affections, where it is fittest for us to employ them, but upon him. And at what time but when we come solemnly to converse with him? Is it justice to deny him the honor of its best gift to us? Our souls are more his gift to us than anything in the world. Other things are so given that they are so often taken from us, but our spirits are the most durable gift. Rational faculties cannot be removed without a dissolution of nature. Well then, as he is God, he is to be honored with all the propensions and ardor that the infiniteness and excellency of such a being requires, and the incomparable obligations he has laid upon us in this day to serve at our hands. In all our worship, therefore, our minds ought to be filled with the highest admiration, love, and reverence. Since our end was to glorify God, we answer not our end and honor him not, unless we give him the choices we have. Reason number 2. We cannot else act towards God according to the nature of rational creatures. Spiritual worship is due to God because of his nature, and due from us because of our nature. As we are to adore God, so we are to adore him as men. The nature of a rational creature makes this impression upon him. He cannot view his own nature without having this duty striking upon his mind, as he knows by inspection into himself that there was a God that made him, so that he is made to be in subjection to God, subjection to him in his spirit as well as his body, and ought morally to testify this natural dependence on him. His constitution informs him that he hath a capacity to converse with God, and that he cannot converse with him but by those inward faculties. If it could be managed by his body without his spirit, beasts might as well converse with God as men. It can never be a reasonable service as it ought to be, Romans 12:1, unless a reasonable faculties be employed in the management of it. It must be a worship prodigiously lame without the concurrence of the chiefest part of man with it. As we are to act conformably to the nature of the object, so also to the nature of our own faculties. Our faculties and the very gift of them, to us, were destined to be exercised. About what? All other things but the author of them. It is that which cannot enter into the heart of a rational creature that he should act as such a creature in other things, and as a stone in things relating to the donor of them, as a man with his mind about him in the affairs of the world, as a beast without reason in his acts towards God. If a man did not employ his reason in other things, he would be an unprofitable creature in the world. If he does not employ his spiritual faculties in worship, he denies him the proper end and use for which they were given him. It is a practical denial that God has given him a soul, and that God has any right to the exercise of it. If there were no worship appointed by God in the world, the natural inclination of man to some kind of religion would be in vain, and if our inward faculties were not employed in the duties of religion, they would be in vain. The true end of God in the endowment of us with them would be defeated by us, as much as lies in us, if we did not serve him with that which we have from him solely at his own cost. As no man can with reason conclude that the rest commanded on the Sabbath, and the sanctification of it, was only a rest of the body, that had been performed by the beasts as well as men, but some higher end was aimed at for the rational creature. So no man can think that the command for worship terminated only in the presence of the body, that God should give the command to man as a reasonable creature, and expect no other service from him than that of a brute. God did not require a worship from man for any want he had, or any essential honor that could accrue to him, but that men might testify their gratitude to him and dependence on him. It is the most horrid ingratitude not to have lively and deep sentiments of gratitude after such obligations, and not to make those due acknowledgments that are proper for a rational creature. Religion is the highest and choicest act of a reasonable creature. No creature under heaven is capable of it that lacks reason. As it is a violation of reason not to worship God, so it is no less a violation of reason not to worship him with a heart and spirit. It is a high dishonor to God and defeats him not only of the service due to him from man, but that which is due to him from all the creatures. Every creature, as it is an effect of God's power and wisdom, does passively worship God. That is, it doth afford a manner of adoration to man, that has reason to collect it and return it where it is due. Without the exercise of the soul, we can no more hand it to God than without such an exercise we can gather it from the creature, so that by this neglect the creatures are restrained from answering their chief end. They cannot pay any service to God without man, nor can man without the employment of his rational faculties render homage to God any more than beast can. This engagement of our inward power stands firm and inviolable. Let the modes of worship be what they will, or the changes of them by the sovereign authority of God never so frequent, this could not expire, or be changed as long as the nature of man endured. As man had not been capable of a command for worship, unless he had been endued with spiritual faculties, so he is not active in a true practice of worship unless they be employed by him in it. The constitution of man makes this manner of worship perpetually obligatory, and the obligation can never cease till man cease to be a creature furnished with such faculties. In our worship, therefore, if we would act like rational creatures, we should extend all the powers of our souls to the utmost pitch, and essay to have apprehensions of God equal to the excellency of his nature, which though we may attempt, we can never attain. Reason number 3. Without this engagement of our spirits, no act is an act of worship. True worship, being an acknowledgment of God and the perfections of his nature, results only from the soul, that being only capable of knowing God, and those perfections which are the object and motive of worship. The posture of the body is but to testify the inward temper and affection of the mind. If therefore it testifies what it is not, it is a lie and no worship. The bowing a beast may be taught to make to an altar may as well be called worship, since a man thinks as little of that God he pretends to honor as the beast does of the altar to which he bows. Worship is a reverent remembrance of God, and giving some honor to him with the intention of the soul. It cannot justly have the name of worship that wants the essential part of it. It is in ascribing to God the glory of his nature, and owning subjection and obedience to him as our sovereign Lord. This is as impossible to be performed without the Spirit as that there can be life and motion in a body without a soul. It is a drawing near to God, not in regard of his essential presence, so all things are near to God, but in acknowledgment of his excellency, which is an act of his Spirit. Without this, the worst of men in a place of worship are as near to God as the best. The necessity of the conjunction of our soul arises from the nature of worship, which being the most serious thing we can be employed in, the highest converse with the highest object requires the choicest temper of spirit in the performance. That cannot be an act of worship which is not an act of piety and virtue. But there is no act of virtue done by the members of the body without the concurrence of the powers of the soul. We may as well call the presence of a dead carcass in a place of worship an act of religion, as the presence of a living body without an intense spirit. The separation of the soul from one is natural, the other moral. That renders the body lifeless, but this renders the act loathsome to God. As the being of the soul gives life to the body, so the operation of the soul gives life to the actions. As he cannot be a man that lacks the form of a man, a rational soul, so that cannot be a worship that wants an essential part, the act of the Spirit. God will not vouchsafe any acts of man so noble a title without the requisite qualifications. Hosea 5 verse 6. They shall go with their flocks and their herds to seek the Lord, and so on. A multitude of lambs and bullocks for sacrifice to appease God's anger. God would not give it the title of worship, though instituted by himself when it wanted the qualities of such a service. The spirit of whoredom was in the midst of them. Verse 4. In the judgment of our Savior, it is a vain worship, when the traditions of men are taught for the doctrines of God. Matthew 15:9. And no less vain must it be when the bodies of men are presented to supply the place of their spirits, as an omission of duty is a contempt of God's sovereign authority, while the omission of the manner of it is a contempt of it, and his amiable excellency. And that which is a contempt and mockery can lay no just claim to the title of worship. Reason number 4. There is in worship an approach of God to man. It was instituted to this purpose, that God might give out his blessings to man, and ought not our spirits to be prepared and ready to receive his communications? We are in such acts more peculiarly in his presence. In the Israelites hearing the law, it said God was to come among them, Exodus 19, verses 10 and 11. Then men are said to stand before the Lord, Deuteronomy 10, verse 8. God before whom I stand, that is, whom I worship. And therefore when Cain forsook the worship of God, settled in his father's family, he is said to go out from the presence of the Lord, Genesis 4:16. God is essentially present in the world, graciously present in his church. The name of the evangelical city is Jehovah Shammah, Ezekiel 48:35. The Lord is there. God is more graciously present in the evangelical institutions than in the legal. He loves the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob, Psalm 87, verse 2. His evangelical law and worship, which was to go forth from Zion as the other did from Sinai, Micah 4:2. God delights to approach to men and converse with them in the worship instituted in the gospel more than in all the dwellings of Jacob. If God be graciously present, ought not we to be spiritually present? A lifeless carcass service becomes not so high and delectable a presence as this. It is to thrust him from us, not invite him to us. It is to practice in the ordinances what the prophet predicts concerning men's usage of our Savior, Isaiah 53:2. There is no form, no comeliness, nor beauty that we should desire him. As slightness in worship reflects upon the excellency of the object of worship, God and his worship are so linked together that whosoever thinks the one not worth his inward care esteems the other not worth his inward affection. How unworthy a slight is it of God, who proffers the opening his treasure, the re-impressing his image, conferring his blessings, admits us into his presence when he has no need for us, who has millions of angels to attend him in his court and celebrate his praise. He that worships not God with the Spirit regards not God's presence and his ordinances, and slights the great end of God in them, and that perfection he may attain by them. We can only expect what God has promised to give when we render to him what he has commanded us to present. If we put off God with a shell, he will put us off with a husk. How can we expect his heart when we do not give him ours, or hope for the blessing needful for us when we render not the glory due to him? It cannot be an advantageous worship without spiritual graces, for those are uniting, and union is the ground of all communion. Reason number 5. To have a spiritual worship is God's end and the restoration of the creature, both in redemption by his Son and sanctification by his Spirit. A fitness for spiritual offerings was the end of the coming of Christ, Malachi 3:3. He should purge them as gold and silver by fire, a spirit burning up their dross, melting them into a holy compliance with and submission to God. To what purpose? That they may offer to the Lord an offering in righteousness, a pure offering from a purified spirit. He came to bring us to God, 1 Peter 3, verse 18. In such a garb as that we might be fit to converse with him. Can we be thus without a fixedness of our spirits on him? The offering of spiritual sacrifices is the end of making any a spiritual habitation in the holy priesthood, 1 Peter 2:5. We can no more be worshippers of God without a worshipper's nature than a man can be without a human nature. As man was at first created for the honor and worship of God, so the design of restoring that image which was defaced by sin, tends to the same end. We are not brought to God by Christ, nor are our services presented to him, if they be without our spirits. But any man that undertakes to bring another to a prince, introduce him in a slovenly and sordid habit, such a garb that he knows hateful to him, or bring the clothes or skin of a man stuffed with straw instead of the person, to come with our skins before God without our spirits is contrary to the design of God in redemption and regeneration. If a carnal worship would have pleased God, a carnal heart would have served his turn without the expense of his spirit and sanctification. He bestows upon man a spiritual nature, that he may return to him a spiritual service. He enlightens the understanding that he may have a rational service, and new molds the will, that he may have a voluntary service. As it is the milk of the word wherewith he feeds us, so it is the service of the word wherewith we must glorify him. Much as there is confusedness in our understanding, so much of starting and levity in our will, so much of slippering and skipping in all our affections, so much is abated of the due qualities of the worship of God, and so much we fall short of the end of redemption and sanctification. Reason number 6. A spiritual worship is to be offered to God because no worship but that can be acceptable. We can never be secured of acceptance without it. He being a spirit, nothing but the worship in spirit can be suitable to him. What is unsuitable cannot be acceptable. There must be something in us to make our services capable of being presented by Christ for an actual acceptation. No service is acceptable to God but by Jesus Christ. But as it is a spiritual sacrifice and offered by a spiritual heart, 1 Peter 2:5, the sacrifice is first spiritual before it be acceptable to God by Christ. When it is an offering in righteousness, it is then and only then pleasant to the Lord, Malachi 3, verses 3 and 4. No prince would accept a gift that is unsuitable to his majesty, and below the condition of the person that presents it. Would he be pleased with a bottle of water for drink from one that has a cellar full of wine? How unacceptable must that be that is unsuitable to the divine majesty? And what can be more unsuitable than withdrawing the operations of our souls from him and the oblation of our bodies? We as little glorify God as God when we give him only a corporal worship, as the heathen did when they represented him in a corporal shape, Romans 1:21. One as well as the other denies his spiritual nature. This is worse, for had it been lawful to represent God to the eye, it could not have been done but by a bodily figure suited to the sense. But since it is necessary to worship him, it cannot be but by a corporal attendance, without the operation of the Spirit. A spiritual frame is more pleasing to God than the highest external adornments, than the greatest gifts and the highest prophetical illumination. The glory of the second temple exceeded the glory of the first, Haggai 2, verses 8 and 9. As God accounts the spiritual glory of ordinances more beneficial for us, so our spiritual attendance upon ordinances is most pleasing to him. He that offers the greatest services without it offers but flesh, Hosea 8, verse 13. They sacrifice flesh for the sacrifices of my offerings, but the Lord accepts them not. Spiritual frames are the soul of religious services. All other carriages without them are contemptible to this Spirit. We can never lay claim to that promise of God. None shall seek my face in vain. We affect a vain seeking of him when we want to do temper a spirit for him. And vain spirits shall have vain returns. It is more contrary to the nature of God's holiness to have communion with such than it is contrary to the nature of light to have communion with darkness.